Well, everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Elevate Career Discussions. For those new to the platform, I'm Kaushik Ravi, founder of Elevate. I've spent the last 8 years in investment banking and private equity, 6 years at Goldman Sachs in banking and PE, then director in private equity. And so Elevate is the premier career platform for careers in business, finance, and investing. So we provide resources, training, networking, and recruiting opportunities for these careers, and also partner with professionals from the top firms in the world. Elevate has featured investing and finance professionals from the top 50 private equity, investment banking, venture capital, hedge fund firms, as well as business leaders like Mark Cuban, Anthony Scaramucci, et cetera. Additionally, we're also partnered with 40 plus top undergrad and the top 10 MBA schools in the world. The two best ways to find out more about Elevate, one is the website, we'll link that here, and then also the Instagram, which has sort of all our advice and all our kind of next sessions, et cetera. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. One other thing, for a limited time, we are offering promos on the career masterclasses. So these are private equity, banking, and VC, which are the only training in the world fully designed and taught by senior level instructors from the top firms like Goldman, Blackstone, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Carlyle, et cetera. So again, we'll send out the link to that. So now on to today's session. We are super excited for a special session with an amazing resource and mentor for your careers. So I want to welcome Vince Bellino to the platform. Vince started his career in structured finance at Goldman, then moved to FIG investment banking, where he's a senior associate there. He graduated from Merrimack College, where he was a 4-year varsity tennis player and did a series of internships ranging from ops to FP&A to banking, then PE before joining Goldman. I'll have him do more of a background on his career journey when we get started. And topics for today's session are going to include career success and advice for the early part of your career, learning about investment banking, structured finance, and other related topics, recruiting, and then a whole host of other topics. The profile of the audience we have today is roughly a 60-40 between undergrad and MBAs and current professionals in banking, consulting, PE, hedge funds, et cetera. So without further ado, let us get started. Vince, welcome to the platform.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Vince, maybe I gave a little bit of a background, but you can give the audience sort of an overview of your career to date, sort of some of the different inflection points and how some of the experiences kind of shaped your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit about me. From Massachusetts, grew up in Essex County. It's about 45 minutes north of Boston. Went to Andover Public High School, graduated in 2010 and took a year off to pick up tennis and lived in California. Subsequent to being in California, ultimately came back to the East Coast where I went to Merrimack College, which is a small liberal arts school where I majored in finance, minored in philosophy. And to Kaushik's point, over the course of my time at Merrimack, I had a series of internships. Starting freshman year, I worked at Putnam Investments as an operations intern. Sophomore year, I worked in an FP&A seat at Beacon Health Strategies, which is a behavioral healthcare firm. Junior year, fall and summer, I interned at boutique M&A shop, Philpott Ball and Werner. They focus within aerospace and defense. And then senior year, I worked at Century Equity, which is a middle market private equity firm in Boston. Ultimately ended up joining Goldman in 2015, summer of 2015. Within the way Goldman's banking division is bifurcated is between financing and classic. And so I started my first 2 years in structured finance. Subsequent to that, Goldman came out with a mobility program for the cohort of 2015, fortunately, where we were, upon promotion, you had the opportunity to go and to rotate elsewhere within the investment bank. And so I took that opportunity to move up to the financial institutions group, which is where I've been over the last 3 years. And so all in, I've been at Goldman for 5 years.
Awesome, thanks, Vince. That's super helpful. We'll start to kind of this first section on the career journey with a few questions from the audience that we had on. So Pedro from Harvard Business School, are you on the call?
Hi, I'm actually an undergrad at Harvard College, and I have first a few questions about your role at Goldman, Vince. First, can you tell us more about your day-to-day in your current role and what aspects of your work you find most fulfilling? Second, why did you choose particularly investment banking? And then third, why Goldman specifically?
Sure. Thanks, Pedro. Nice to meet you. So, when I take a step back and think about why I chose investment banking. I remember my sophomore year, when I was working at Beacon, I had some conversations with the CEO, and he had talked a little bit about, they had recently done an acquisition. And so from my perspective, I was interested to learn a little bit about the role of the investment banker, what the process was like, et cetera. And so that was kind of the thought process, or the rationale for ultimately trying to, better understand the actual job in the industry, et cetera. Why Goldman Sachs? I mean, ever since 2012, when I endeavored to, meet two alumni at the Goldman office, I always, when I left, I always kind of had in the back of my mind that that's where I wanted to be. I think, culturally, just the way that folks think about the world, and the way that, frankly, over my time at Merrimack College, as I built my network, et cetera, I mean, the level of shepherding and helpfulness that folks there had, was super important to me and key. And then look, I mean, to answer your question with respect to the day-to-day, I mean, I think, when you kind of think about the role of an analyst and then the role of an associate, and as you progress, the day-to-day, it varies, but, at the analyst level, you're doing everything from, you're running analytics, you're, doing, mundane things like setting out dial-ins, but at the same time, you also have the opportunity to get on calls with clients and to talk about, the analysis that you're doing. At the associate level, I think it's a little bit different in that, you still do a lot of the tasks that the analysts do. It's just you also are now managing, a junior, you're managing someone beneath you, right? And so as part of that, you still continue doing some of the stuff that you previously did, but you're now managing someone, and you're tasked with looking to drive processes, et cetera, and kind of communicate with senior bankers, clients, et cetera. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, that's a good question to answer. I'll just add on one thing. I think you talked about sort of why a certain firm or why a certain place. I think so much of it's going to come down to sort of, the people there, and that's number one, kind of how you vibe and sort of the dynamic there. Number two is the types of deals and experience that you want to build. So, there's sort of an immense number of firms or banks out there, but sort of, what over your career, I think it's sort of finding that, is it the middle market space that you really like? Is it large companies that you like dealing with? What types of problems you like to solve? I think that's another kind of big consideration. And then sort of lastly, where it's going to give you the best set of experiences to sort of launch your career, right? Your first few jobs out of, whether you guys are in undergrad or MBA, really, I think is the sort of launching pad for the next 20, 30 years. So that's sort of maybe what I'll add to Vince's answer, but I thought it was really good. One other question I think we had on this career journey topic came from Julia Brown from Yale.
Hi, I was wondering, did you find anything like surprising or unexpected when you joined Goldman full-time compared to like the investment banking and other like internship experiences you had during college?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say, especially since I didn't have, I didn't intern at Goldman. I think day one, one of the surprising things, was just the level of accountability, the level of, when you kind of think about when you're in your summer internship or you're in your classes, you go to a summer internship, and after a couple of weeks, it's over, right? You take a class, you have a couple, it's a couple months and it's over, right? But when you join full time, it's, in theory, it's forever. And so I think when I think about, what that impact had when I started, the level of accountability, and it's just, you're now part of a team. I remember, specifically, it was like within my first few weeks, I was tasked with doing something, and I worked on some analysis, and immediately once I sent it out, senior VP calls me and he's like, what is this number? And I just sat there frozen, because I thought that, perhaps an associate or someone else was going to take it. And it was like, what's this number? What's the rationale for it? And so I think it's that level of, you are there, and you're held accountable for what you're doing. And, I'd say at that point in time, that relative to being in school and having that experience, it's a little bit different, but at the same time, it's rewarding, right? I mean, you have skin in the game, you're there, you're ready to go. And so, and progressively over your career and years, you figure out how to manage those things. But I think that was the biggest surprise to me.
That's a really good point. And Vince is almost being modest. He's been, he's extremely good at his job. And so I think that's also, I think, like, I will add to that. I'll just second that. I think that's the biggest thing a lot of analysts over my career as well. The first few weeks or the first couple months, it's that level of, hey, you are responsible for everything you're sort of doing, like maybe and the analytics, the modeling, et cetera. There's sort of, we and any bank probably, and specifically at Goldman, will give you as much rope as kind of you run with. And so I think that's actually an opportunity, right? So to sort of take ownership and lead in whatever you can. So that's a really good answer. So Vince, maybe the first sort of the second area of discussion is a little bit more of a deep dive into the investment banking job. And a lot of questions came in about that aspect. We'll start with this and work backwards. We have a lot of first and second year analysts on the call who anonymously submitted sort of how do you deal with or actually, let's start with this one. What are the definite experiences or types of things that they should be focused on their first couple of years right out of undergrad in terms of experiences, skill sets, things that they should be focused on building out?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I mean, I think as having been an analyst and as you guys endeavor upon your careers, I think day one, everyone wants to work on a deal. And that most people, everyone wants to be staffed on a live deal and it's really exciting, et cetera. But I think it's important to understand that there are certain building blocks to, there's certain things that you need to learn and understand before you're immediately thrown into the deep end, which by the way, you will be in the most undesired situations. We can talk about that at another point, but you got to understand, how to, as literally as simple as how do you pop open PowerPoint? How do you put together a deck? How do you do all those things? Because when you're in a live situation, you're working with clients and, the clock is on, you got to be on your A game. I think secondly, over time, it's never too young to start establishing relationships with clients, right? At the most junior level, you're probably not going to talk to the CEO, CFO, but you most certainly are going to get exposure to varying levels of seniority across your clients. And I think it's really important to build those relationships because over time, those individuals will become perhaps CEOs, CFOs, and more senior. So I think the client relationship, understanding the analytics, and coming back to my first point, you want to work on live situations. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of probably why folks sign up for the job, right? Is because you want to work on something exciting. You want to work on something that's revolutionary towards an industry, a particular company, et cetera. So I'll pause there, but those are the key. I think those are the key things that you should be looking to focus on.
Yeah, so super helpful. I agree. I think everything that you do as a junior banker, it would probably be you doing for the first time, right, in your careers or your lives. So I think that's the other thing to think about. It's sort of, it isn't, even when we get to the recruiting topics, it isn't necessarily like, hey, I needed to have taken all these courses in PowerPoint or Excel. But the biggest thing I think we all look for is, can this person figure it out when they're given a problem? Like, I think that's the fundamental crux of everything you're gonna be working on. And so I think that's the biggest skill, if you can sort of start thinking about it that way or get your mind to start thinking about it that way. But yeah, so that's a great answer. So let us go to the second topic. I think a lot of the folks wanted to ask about, which is how do you differentiate? Maybe this sort of builds off of what we just talked about. How do you differentiate yourself in banking? How do you think about kind of approaching sort of making it in the top bucket, or just more broadly doing well in that role as a junior banker?
Sure. So look, I mean, I think as everyone on here is in the pursuit of excellence, right? And so I think what's really important is ownership, right? I mean, as you guys, I'm sure, get in here from other folks all the time, right? Like having a positive attitude, working hard, like all of those things are really important, but those are baseline, right? And so I think it's really important to, take a step back and actually understand, like, what is it that is going to, what is the task to Kaushik's point? What am I being asked to do, right? And you want to do it to the best of your ability. Right? If it's, I got to put 100 numbers on a page, you got to get 100 numbers out of 100 numbers, or you got to strive for all those numbers to be right. If someone says, okay, we need you to build a model, you're going to try to wind it up as best as possible. Right? If someone says, so I guess the point is everything that you do, you want to focus on doing as seamless as possible. And over time, all of those things will continue to build. We all make mistakes. I'm the first one to say it. I was not a good first year analyst. Like, it's okay. But as long as you continue to show progression and you show ownership and you're continuing to be engaging and supporting your, senior folks as well as the client, you're well on your way.
Yeah, I love that question. Love that answer. I couldn't agree more. I think ownership is the key. It's going to be hard at the beginning to take ownership of things, but I think over time, if you kind of develop that mentality, people will start relying on you and you'll start building a reputation. So I love that answer, Vince. Second question, or the third question from a lot of the summer interns that have gone through the process, or even the first years, how do you deal with the stressful times in banking, right? Like obviously time management, people management, the stresses of the job, maybe some tips that you have for the folks that are kind of going through that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think all of those things are real. I think number one is just having perspective, right? Which is, understand what is the task at hand? What do you need? What is the timetable? Remember 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 168 hours, right? There's time to do a lot. And I'll probably hear, from my senior bankers now that I actually quoted that. But you gotta understand, like, what are we solving for? What's important? What are we trying to deliver, and why are we delivering it? And I think over time you will realize and understand, like, what's important, what's not important, what's a nice to have, what's a need to have, right? And so when you're tasked with multiple things and everyone's getting stressed out, people are getting stressed because they think they're underwater. It's important to understand, what are you doing? Get your list going, sit with your associate or your VP or your MD or whoever it is, your boss. I mean, this goes for, it's not just finance, it's just in general. Sit down, have a discussion, and figure out, okay, what is the path forward? What are we going to do here? And if there's constraints, which there always are, right? Everyone's busy, you're working across multiple things, deals, client service, whatever it may be, multiple projects. It's important to ask others and post them, be over communicative. One of the things that I, coming into Goldman, that I just didn't appreciate was, if you think you're communicating, you're not communicating enough. Communicate more. If you think you're over communicating, continue to do it. And so it's really important to make sure that you've got, you have your checklist, you have your list of projects, what you're going to work on, and you figure out what's the best path forward. I have a running list every day of, okay, here are the things that need to be done here across different projects. And it's helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think at any point in time, you're probably working on 4 or 5 projects, deals, or something at the same time, and each of those have like 3 or 4 work streams. So it's just, to Vince's point, really important to be organized, but also what works for you, right? So I know analysts who go in there, they do have to do the model once, and then they just kind of have built everything in there, and then they don't need to review it. I know other analysts that sort of wake up like 6 a.m. to review the model before they send it out. So kind of start figuring out what works for you, and do that, as opposed to sort of seeing, get the best skills from other people, but really figure out what works for you. I think, to Vince's point, like lists and things to keep you organized, or just, diligently working through stuff. Because at the end of the day, the end goal is, when you're sitting in a meeting, the numbers or the stuff has to be right? So whatever you need to do to ensure that, I think, is important. So I appreciate that answer. I think that's great. Let's go to a few audience questions. Billy, do you want to start us off, from Yale and incoming into Goldman?
Yeah. Hey, Vince. So I'm a junior at Yale and incoming AFG summer analyst next year. I have 2 questions. The first being, how has the pandemic kind of affected the nature of the deals you're doing in terms of being more complex, or kind of talk to that? And also, how does the team culture kind of vary across different financing groups, and also compared to the classic groups?
Yeah, look, so in terms of the pandemic, as you would imagine, things are busy. I think things are busy for everyone, right? I think, one of the key takeaways as we continue to kind of evolve and realize, you kind of go through this, is communication is everything. It's super, super important. Again, this is not just banking, this is just everything, right? School, whatever, it's applicable across the board. So I think, in terms of culture, the culture doesn't change. The people are the same. So it's just important that, taking a step back, having a perspective, understanding, again, like, what are we solving for? What are we needing? And I think, there's a material increase in Zooms, et cetera, as we're Zooming right now, as opposed to being in the office, right? Or, so I think in terms of the COVID impact, it's certainly been something that you got to just, you got to ramp up and you got to figure out. But at the end of the day, we're still doing, we're still executing and doing, focusing on whatever projects or deals we have to take care of. But there's, and then in terms of, like, to directly answer your other question, there's definitely been a pickup in, an activity across both classic and financing.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I would kind of second that. What I'll add to that is like priorities may have shifted a little bit, right? So whereas before we were all focused on growth, 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 now sort of you think about, and I think a lot of portfolio companies or a lot of just companies in general are thinking about how do you sort of answer liquidity, or how do you answer sort of some of the operational side. So I'd say kind of some of those things have shifted too. But I think at the end of the day, look, whether it's banking or PE or any of these careers, sort of figure out, and then we're figuring out who's the end goal here and who are we trying to add value to. So it's a client's, for the client service business like banking or consulting, I think we have to constantly think about sort of not the regular constructs of M&A or growth, but sort of what are the things that will help this client at this point in time. And I think that requires sort of a deeper understanding of what are the challenges the client is facing, and so what is going on in the market. So I would probably say there's a little bit more reactionary like proactivity if you think about it that way in terms of what the clients are looking for. That's the only thing I'd add to Vince's point, but I think it's a great point.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Yeah, no worries. So I think maybe we'll go to Alan from Wharton or UPenn Wharton.
Yeah, hi Vince. Nice to meet you. I'm Alan. I'm a sophomore undergrad at Penn. I'm in the LSM program, so I'm majoring in both bio and business. Very interested in healthcare. The question I had is just, I feel, bankers obviously have a lot of things doing and they work very hard. I was just wondering, what do you find as the most rewarding or favorite part of your job?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think when I kind of take a step back and try to identify what are the things that I enjoy about the job, look, I mean, I think one of my favorite things to do is, you're presented with a problem. And I enjoy being able to get around the proverbial table and speak and kind of hash out ideas with both senior or junior bankers, all of us on a team, and kind of think about like, okay, how do we solve this problem? Right. I mean, that's, for me, it's intellectually stimulating, complex. I personally, like working on more complex things, hairy things, off the run opportunities. And so, when any time that I'm on a project like that, those are, those are the things that I look forward to. I mean, I think while we're all going to work on straight down the fairway things, we're going to work on complex. You're going to work on a whole variety of different things. But yeah, I mean, the ones that are more tricky, or there's a different angle to be had, that really forces you to think outside the box. And that's that's part of what I enjoy most about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, a great answer, Vince. I think the complexity you talked to, actually, frankly, that's what I miss about banking. Kind of, looking back, it's certainly like the complexity of the things that we work on, as well as sort of just the nuanced nature and how, clients are smart. You're dealing with CEOs, CFOs, so you have to give them really solid advice, and you have to really target, kind of what they're looking for in order to sort of be a respected advisor. And I think that's one area, to Vince's point, I definitely miss about banking as I look back. Let's go to Lindsey from Stanford.
Hi, I'm Lindsey, but I wanted to know if you could elaborate on the different types of work and projects you typically work on in investment banking, and how you proactively manage the exposure you get to different types of transactions and deals.
Yeah, sure. So look, I mean, I think having spent time in financing, right, you have, in terms of just like thinking about all the different pods, right? You have equity capital markets, you have debt capital markets, you have structured finance, you have derivatives, right? I mean, I was in structured finance, so mainly there I was tasked with underwriting debt deals, advancing or lending, providing warehouse leverage to some of these originators, and then on the classic, look, I mean, I think on the classic side, you're focusing more on M&A activity, divestiture, sales. If you're going to buy a business, you're advising clients on a whole host of different, alternatives. I'd say, clearly one of the key differentiators or the differences is in financing, you're in a product group, right? So you are supposed to be the master of the product, right? So in structured finance, you work on a whole host of different things, but, you focus within a particular, that particular product. In classic, I mean, or on the M&A side, you have the opportunity to work across a broad swath of different things. I mean, both are super important, right? And look, I mean, when I kind of look at having worked at structured finance complements what I currently do on the FIG side very much. So that's another piece, right? Is try to get as much exposure to varying folks' opportunities as possible. So then to answer your second question in terms of how do you ensure you're on the right deal, et cetera? Look, I mean, part of this goes back to the original point, which is you got to show and prove yourself that you have the ability, that you have you are a reliable resource to then go and to put on deals. And over time, as you build those deal reps, you can go and you have communication and you speak to your colleagues and bosses like, hey, I want to go and I would like to work on X, or I would like to work on Y, or industry specific. So it's important to be proactive about that as well.
Yeah, great question. Great answer as well. I think the one thing I'll highlight on Vince's point as well, I think it wasn't apparent to me early on, and to Vince's point, how interconnected the industry is, but also how interconnected the firms are. So just the ability to understand what other parts of the firm do. We're going to spend a little bit of time on structured finance and capital markets a little bit later on this call, but you may get on a staff on a deal like 2 weeks from now that says, hey, it's an IPO. So you're working with, equity capital markets. 2 weeks later, you'll get staffed on a deal that's debt. So you're working with the debt side. So just understanding the interconnectivities. And so that's number one. And number two is then building relationships. So it's so much easier to call up someone, if a deal's pricing Monday morning, to call someone Friday night, if they, if you have a good working relationship and ask them for help on something, than if you don't know the person, right? So I think just the relationship aspect was something I think I underappreciated when I started, but I think it's such a huge component, especially as deals become more global, we're working on things across the world and all this stuff. It's ultimately a people business. Let us go to Neetish, if you want to do an intro, and then you can ask your question.
Sure. Thanks so much, Kaushik. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for your time, Vince. I'm already learning so much. My name is Neetish. I'm a sophomore at Stanford, majoring in MS&E, management science and engineering, which is their way of saying business and tech. Minor in computer science. Really enjoying my time out here. Just sort of want to, I think the conversation from Lindsey was just a great segue into sort of trying to get an understanding of basically what would you say are some of the key traits in analysts, basically the key traits and habits you just love to see in an analyst when they actually hit the desk, both when they're interviewing and you're sort of trying to gauge how they're going to be prospectively, as well as once they actually come to work with you, just sort of something you admire and just what makes you want to work with them really well and just makes them a great candidate.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, look, I think number one is attitude, right? Show up to the table, have a great attitude, have a lot of energy, show that you're there to play, right? I think two is you got to understand that, to where what we had spoken about before, like the level of accountability is real. And you just got to, and one should just remember that, they are a super, super important part or piece of the team, right? And so, look, I mean, having a great attitude, bring a lot of energy. I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but, having that attention to detail, be intellectually curious, ask questions, right? I mean, I think, especially for myself, when I first joined, I was afraid to ask questions because I was afraid to look silly. And I still look silly, frankly, but you gotta be, you gotta leave your comfort zone. You gotta ask questions, be intellectually curious. One of the things that, I mean, even looking back at some of our summer interns that we had, I was impressed with one of the summer interns, was running through some sort of an analysis or pulling some sort of a screen. And, this individual was like, oh, this doesn't look right. I want to flag this for you. Right. Stuff like that is really, really helpful. So this goes to another piece, right? If you're going to be put in a position where you don't know the answer and you're going to have to exercise a level of judgment in order to A, be resourceful, B, you want to raise up the flagpole or in terms of, your colleagues, et cetera. I think those are really important. And then of course, everyone is always hyper focused on the technicals. I mean, understanding finance, understanding the accounting and how things work and all of it, all of that is of course really important. But look, and I think the last piece here is don't be afraid to put yourself in a really difficult position just because, it's going to be painful, right? Like the best analyst associates and, as you progress, and this is not just banking, I'm sure this is across the board, the best performers are those who do. And they, and look, I mean, there's going to be some things, there's going to be deals, there's going to be projects that are painful. Right. And you just got to plow right through, take ownership, and you will see on the other side, you will be better for it. It'll be a great experience and you would have learned something and you can use that. You look at your toolkit. It's like, okay, well, I can think back to when I did this deal or I worked on this project. Here's how I went about solving this problem. So I think, those are the things that are really important.
Awesome. Great question. I love that answer. I think we covered so many things. Accountability, taking ownership, as well as attention to detail, etc. One other thing I'll add to that is come in with solutions. So like you say, hey, this model is not working, or this is not really working. I don't, the comp set that we picked maybe isn't right because I did some work. Well, that's a good answer. What's an even better answer is, hey, I did some work. I think these are some other ways we could be thinking about this, or these are some other comps maybe we could be using because of this reason. So I think anytime we see someone who brings in that sort of solution-based kind of thing to a problem that they're having, even if it's with you and your analyst or you and your associate, say, hey, this is not working the model, but I think we should do it this way. That just means so much because I think they've thought about it. It could be completely wrong, but they've at least thought about it and are being proactive about that. So I think just to add on to sort of what had been said there. Awesome. I think that's super helpful in sort of the investment banking stuff. Maybe we'll spend a few minutes on capital markets and structured finance. I think a lot of questions came in, Vince, around sort of the role or where that sits and sort of anything you want to share about how that sits in the grand scheme of things and what exactly you do in that group like structured finance or capital markets.
Yeah, sure. So structured finance has multiple pods. I particularly sat, I covered specialty finance businesses, marketplace lenders. And so just at a very, very high level, it's a debt solution for originators or for companies. If you think about, in terms of more technically speaking, just basically what we're doing is you're taking loans or you're taking assets, you're putting them into a box, right? That box is spitting off cash flows. And you're basically figuring out how much debt or how much leverage can I put on those cash flows, and then you're syndicating that debt to investors. So it's an alternative to if you go and you look at some of the bigger companies, they're going and they issue corporate debt, corporate level debt, investment grade, high yield, whatever solution for in the spirit of looking for funding or financing, right? I think the other element too is if you're an originator of loans, you need to fund those loans, right? And so another thing that we do is we advance warehouse lines or we advance revolvers or credit lines to a lot of these originators so that they can then go and continue to originate their loans, et cetera. And I think the third piece is there are businesses who are looking to sell assets, right? And we will advise those businesses on disposing of assets, figuring out what do we think the value of the cash flows are worth, and then ultimately going and looking for a potential buyer. So I would say that's generally, that's how I would kind of think about the structured finance, just at a very high level.
Awesome, super helpful. We have a few questions to back on this topic, and let's go to Tom Dirks if you want to ask sort of your question. Do your intro.
Hi, Vince. Thank you for speaking with us today. I'm a senior at the University of Wisconsin and incoming analyst with Houlihan Lokey. And I was wondering what the biggest differences in skill set between an analyst in structured finance would gain versus that in a classic group.
Yeah. So look, I think in structured finance, you're in both seats. You're solving for what do you like, what's the value of either the business or what's the value of a portfolio of assets, whether they be loans, they be airplanes, whatever it may be. I would say, look, on the structured finance desk, you have more of a bespoke, lens in terms of what you're looking at, right? And what I mean by that is like, for example, the seat that I worked on is I covered student lenders, right? And I kind of think about, okay, what do I think the value, or what do we think the value of some of the underlying loans is worth? But you have student lenders, you have auto, you have a whole host of different, you have a whole host of other sub-verticals. And so you become a master, or you attempt to become a master at understanding those particular verticals. I would say on the classic side, look, it's what I'm sure a lot of you, when you do your, a lot of it is the corporate finance, right? Is thinking about, the three financial statements and how do they intertwine, and and ultimately, like, how do you think about valuing the business? And so, look, while in both seats, they're both technical and they require, you got to be analytical, but I would just say one is more at the corporate level, and then in structured finance in particular is more at the asset level. And then look, when you marry those two together, I'm fortunate to have sat in both seats. Once you understand how the assets perform and what you think about them, you got to remember in FIG in particular, banks, especially finance businesses, their assets are their portfolios, And so if you understand what those assets are worth, actually, then you can think about, okay, well, what are the reverberations or what are the ramifications in terms of, the other aspects of the business, right? And so I'll pause there, but that's a little bit about both.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think to Vince's point, I think his, a background like that is actually super interesting because you do get to think about things on an asset side or even capital markets, right? And there was a question earlier about, capital markets. It's a little bit about getting different experiences, at least from my experience, I think to Vince's earlier point, getting a few different experiences in the early part of your career, such that you can sort of determine then over the course of your career, what are the things that are interesting to you? And also, what are you really good at, right? Uniquely good at? Are you good at looking at cash flows, or are you kind of better at advising companies? So I think that's the goal. That is sort of the goal of your career, to find those things that you're really good at and also can do really well and actually become the best at, right? So I think that just an addendum to what sort of to Vince's point there.
I would add one more thing as well, which is generally just like culturally, right? I mean, on the financing floor, things are a lot faster paced, right? Don't get me wrong, on the classic side, things can be just as fast paced. It's just the velocity in terms of at which you're actually churning deals and doing things on the financing floor is just a little bit different. On the classic side, when you think about doing an M&A deal, I mean, typically those are projects that are longer term. I mean, they're all, typically they're projects that take a little bit more time as opposed to on the structured finance. It can be, it can range in terms of a couple of weeks. I'd also say, the other thing too is that's a little bit different in terms of, from a financing perspective, at least, I found myself interacting a lot more, because you're not necessarily interacting with the CEOs and CFOs at a junior level. Like I found myself interacting and building more relationships with, the treasurer, head of capital markets, et cetera, at a very, at the analyst level. And I think, inevitably when you're doing an M&A deal or you're covering a larger client, you're probably not, more often than not, you're not going to be doing that just yet. But that's just another element too. I would think about. You get different varying levels of exposure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Markets versus sort of businesses, but then coming together. Great points. Let us now switch to another topic that is, I think, top of mind for a lot of students, is sort of just the idea of topics around recruiting within the finance world for investment banking. Obviously, Vince, you come from a background non-target, sort of had a bunch of different internships. I think we'll get to some of those things and how those and sort of what you did on the banking side, on the recruiting side. If folks beyond this discussion are interested, I'll share the link to a lot of the resources that we have on Elevate, where we've spoken to other professionals or even the training. So feel free to check those out. But let us start sort of, Vince, in your mind, as you've seen the recruiting process from both sides, sort of what are some of your key takeaways as far as keys to the recruiting process, right? Breaking it down with like the networking piece, the relationship building piece, as well as the experience building piece.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say, first and foremost, networking is super important, right? And so whether that be, if you go to a school and you have great alumni, well, everyone has great alumni, right? But like whatever your school is, you should be leveraging the folks that have gone through the school, cold call them, cold email them, whatever you have to do to get in front of them, to get a better understanding of what exactly they do, and see if it, and ultimately figure out, like, is this what I want to do? Is this interesting to me, et cetera? I would say, so number one is showing proactiveness, right? I think, when you kind of think about it from a resume perspective, one's resume, is showing all of the experiences that they've had are a great indicator of, okay, is this person interested in the job? Why, your resume tells a story, right? I think it's important that, everything that's on your resume, you want to show that you've done everything in the pursuit of excellence, right? Whether that be GPA, whether that be you're in different classes, you're taking your modeling tests or what have you. Like, you want to show that this is what you want to do. This is why you want to do it, right? And I think, look, I mean, everyone's always focused on the technicals and like understanding the technical aspect of the job, and yeah, that's very important. But I think it's really important conveying why you're here and what you're ultimately solving for and why that's the case.
Yeah, good question. We had a question from this is Ruben from HBS, Harvard Business School. Ruben, do you want to? Let me just make sure they're on. Well, the question was, what are some networking outreach advice you can give? So it's kind of beyond what you just said. kind of the alumni network, but maybe you could comment a little bit on sort of how do you maximize those interactions, or how do you get in front of people? And then when you get to sort of an informational session, how do you maximize those conversations and make a solid impact?
Yeah, look, so I think, as I said before, you can look at your alumni, you can look at, but one of the things that, when I went through the process that I focused on was, cold emails, reach out to folks. Like, you'd be surprised. Everyone is willing to get on the phone for the most part, right? If someone doesn't respond to the first email them again in 2 weeks. They don't respond to that one, email again, right? A lot of the folks, like even for myself, like, folks are busy. And so sometimes you may not get, they may be focusing on something else, or they may not be able to get back to you, not because they don't want to, but just simply because they're focused on other things. So I think be relentless in terms of be persistent, right? I think, look, anytime I would set up a call with whomever I was speaking to, my goal in that 30 minutes was the key piece of those 30 minutes. Like, I waited for the last 5 minutes to hopefully, impress the individual such that they would then say, hey, look, you have a great background, blah, 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 blah. I'm willing to either connect you with someone else or put you in contact with someone. And that's kind of how I kind of always thought about, cold emailing, cold calling. You want, like, that is your 30 minutes to convey to that individual what your interest and kind of, frankly, what you bring to the table. I think, and you do enough of those and you realize that you've had enough of those conversations, you can then draw upon, those little vignettes that you're articulating to then when you go and you sit in front of the interviewer, you're already ready to go. You've already articulated your story. And it's already crisp. And I think, coming from a non-target and not having had probably all the interviews that other folks may have had, I found that a good way to practice was all these conversations. And so I think always be willing to reach out, have a conversation. It just, and from a networking perspective, it's important, right? So I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. Definitely proactiveness and persistence. I think, persistence always is helpful. And then preparation, in my mind, right? When you get that informational, or when you get that coffee chat, like, treat that like an interview, right? So research the person you're talking to, find out what you can about them, but also what industries are they working in? Maybe look up 3 or 4 deals so you can kind of have a meaningful conversation, such that they walk away. Like, that's the whole point. They walk away saying, hey, this candidate is impressive. Like, let us, refer them on internally in the process. That's worth, more than anything you put on the resume, right? So I think just preparation is another thing, that I'd add on to that list. So that's a great answer. On the non-target point, we had Owen, Brian, if you want to ask your question around sort of the non-target point.
Perfect. Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you, Vince, for taking the time today. So essentially, my question is around how, as a non-target, would you stand out apart from, as you're already listing, networking like crazy and getting a high GPA? How do you think you can stand out from the rest of the crowd who attend like these target or semi-target schools?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It took me 4 years to try to figure it out. And it's, I think for everyone it's different. But at the end of the day, you need to, when I think about all the interviews and super days that I did, and I was trying to, land a first time, full-time job, I thought I was doing well on the interviews, but I wasn't getting offers. And that, like, for maybe either it's, illusions of grandeur, maybe I wasn't doing well, or maybe there's just better candidates, which is probably the case. But what I think at the end of the day, I started trying to think about, like, okay, is it the fact that I'm coming from a non-target? And so I remember walking in, this is my senior year in the fall, and I remember walking in and saying, okay, I'm going to proactively talk about the fact that I'm a non-target. And I waited until I had the most senior person in that interview. And at the end of the interview, I said, hey, look, you're probably wondering why you should hire me from that college kid or student. And I was like, it's because I'm a wild card. It's, if you look at my resume, all of the experiences that I had, all of the hard work that I've done will translate into the job if you give me this opportunity. And, a week later, I got an offer. And so don't be, be forward leaning in terms of, hey, I come from a non-target, but here's what I bring to the table. I think one of the most compelling or most important things is to tell the interviewer why they should hire you. You should hire me because of whatever your story is. I mean, you know, and I think at the end of the day, that is the most important piece. Communicate why they should hire you over the next person. And, you know, in my case, it was always like, why should I hire you versus the Harvard versus, you know, all these great schools. And, you know, finally it took me until senior year to realize and understand, like, okay, I need to hit this on the head. So I'll pause there, but that's how I think about it.
That is an amazing answer. I think of all the sessions we've had, that's one of the best answers I think we've heard on any question. So I really like that. And I'll just add on one or two things to that. One is, I think you have to find the balance, and I kind of coming from a place where I probably have done 1,000+ interviews in both banking and private equity over the last 8 years. And I think a couple of things that stand out to me as well, to Vince's point. One is, yes, you have to be modest, but I think it's not the time. I think you have to be like humbly braggadocious about the things that you've done and really be at the forefront of, hey, this is all the things I've done. And that's what they've reflected about myself or my X, Y, and Z ability. So that's one thing. The second thing is, a lot of people, to Vince's point, a lot of people I think go through the interview just being like, oh, let me just not fail. Like, let me just not get that technical answer wrong. Let me just like make sure I nail all the points that I was going to say, etc. But so rather than being very defensive, I think we all should be a little more, you know, offensive to Vince's point towards the end, be like, hey, this is why you should hire me, right? So not the fact that I'm just going through the interview and hoping not to screw up and then hopefully make it to the end, but in fact, kind of go on the offensive and say, hey, this is why you should hire me. And guaranteed sort of, if you make salient points and sort of bring that to the table, that'll really stick out to people. And you do that often enough, I think people will take a chance on you. So I think I love that answer. Awesome. So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah.
One other just point to piggyback on that. Be authentic, right? Like, have authentic answers. Everyone has great stories, right? It's just a matter of fine tuning and figuring out like what's the best way to articulate why investment banking, right? Like, you know, you can Google why investment banking. They'll give you a laundry list of things, of all the great skill sets that, you know, you may or may not get. But, you know, have a personalized story. Answer some of these. I mean, the key, you need to answer the key questions. You know, with something that's just different. It's not just, well, you know, I want to go into investment banking for all the obvious reasons. I mean, of course that's the case, but try to think about ways like, where's that aha moment? Like, where, you know, why am I doing this? Because that will serve as a differentiator, right? I mean, if someone comes in and says, hey, I just want to, you know, I want to do banking for all the obvious reasons, it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, get in line. So just make sure when you're weaving your vignettes, like, make them personable, make them idiosyncratic to you, because again, I'm sure you guys all have great stories. It's just important to show it.
I totally agree. So how many super days that we've sat on the other side interviewing, we'll go through 10 interview candidates, and guys, you're getting the same questions, right? Why banking? Why this firm? You know, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Like, some version of all these stories you're going to get for 80% of your interviews. But sitting on the other side, if I've just listened to 12 of the same answers of, hey, I want to work on those complex deals, you know, financial analysis, valuation, it all sounds the same. And so to Vince's point, like, why? I did this, and so I learned about this. I was in a family business. I realized the importance of capital raising. I was in this. I did this. So I think whatever you can say that makes it about yourself is going to be a huge differentiator when we sit at the end of the day at 5:30 and we're looking at all the resumes and all the people that have just sat for the super day. So could not agree with that more. Let's keep going. We had a few more questions so let us go to all right, Spencer. We'll go to your question, and then we'll go to a few more on the recruiting side.
Hey, thank you. And Vince, thanks for coming today. I was going to be a sophomore this fall at Harvard. I'm thinking about majoring in economics, but I took a gap working at high yield and credit right now with Fidelity, learning a lot about the capital structure and the assets that they're managing. I'm interested in IB, and I just wanted to get your take and recommendations on kind of tackling the technical and modeling aspects of investment banking that will become more prevalent as I move forward through different internships. And, you know, how important is it to just get that fundamental understanding and conceptual understanding and talking to people, but when will that become necessary in advancing forward, and how should I go about this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say, I mean, it sounds like you're going to have a great experience. Look, I mean, I think the reality is technicals are important, but you're all an undergrad, right? I mean, the reality, like, it's great that everyone, you know, if you're taking a finance course, accounting course, right? I mean, that is, in my mind, if you want to understand the building blocks, absolutely. But I remember being in undergrad, and I was so focused on making sure that I knew, like, okay, walk me through an LBO and like what happens, like talk about goodwill and all this stuff. And I just like would go down this rabbit hole. And I mean, it serves a purpose and it's good. It's just the probability of you getting something so technical is probably pretty low, right? And so, if you're intellectually curious and you truly want to understand and you want to learn it, great. But at the same time, like I do, understand the building blocks, very important, but don't like, this goes to the other point, focus on your story more than the technicals, right? Because more likely than not, everyone's going to get the same technicals. Walk me through a DCF. What are the 3 ways to, like everyone can generally, I mean, it's a check the box, of course, but, I wouldn't bog yourself down with like trying to understand like, the capital structure for this and that. And by the way, like totally, if you want to do it in your free time and you want to understand it and you're working on it, totally, absolutely. And by the way, I think the other thing too is if you do have that exposure, if you're working on a project and you are running financial analytics, et cetera, like those are things that you want to make sure that you put in the front of the recruit, in the interview. Like, hey, I worked on this. Here's exactly what I did, right? And it'll show that you have the technical wherewithal. But it's a long-winded way of saying technicals are important, but focus on the qualitative because that's ultimately the most important piece.
Yeah, great answer. I think when we talk about, we did this for the Elevate training where I asked for sort of the 8 or 9 bankers kind of what they thought, and everyone kind of echoed 2 things. One is, behaviorals are like 80-90% make it or break it. And frankly, we asked all of them, hey, how would you answer these questions? And we went through the strengths, weaknesses, et cetera. So obviously you guys can check that out if you want, but the biggest takeaway was focus on behavioral in your story, kind of even beyond a lot of the technicals. And obviously you want to get that stuff right, but they're more check the box. Let's keep going. We had maybe 3 or 4 more questions. Ethan from Maryland, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you again for coming out today and sharing your advice. It's definitely been really helpful so far. So my name is Ethan, and I'm a freshman finance major at the University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business. And as a college freshman, my question was, what are some of the best ways to get involved? Like, what are some of the things that you did or you've seen like your colleagues do to try to get a head start as a freshman?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think the reality is day one as a freshman is the ticker is running, right? And so in terms of like practical things, join clubs, be in the finance group. If there's no finance group, start a finance group. If maybe you guys have if your school has a newspaper, is there a finance section? If not, start one. Like the point is show proactivity, do things that show that, if you think that you want to go into banking or it is finance that you're passionate about, exemplify that. And I think, so that's one piece of it. I think, with respect to all the other things in terms of what do you do as a freshman, it's never too early. Try to get it, you want to figure out, see if you can get some sort of professional experience, internship, et cetera. I mean, I don't know how it is now, but I would imagine, trying to get an internship as a freshman is not, it can be difficult. And I totally empathize and I totally understand that. But it's those things that just equip you and convey to ultimately when you graduate for full-time jobs. It's that stuff that differentiates, from you, from others.
Totally agree. One thing I'd just say, also take a little bit of time up front, especially if you're kind of freshman, sophomore, just figure out what it is that you want to do. Like get an understanding, obviously use all the resources. We've talked to pretty much every firm and every kind of professional on the street. So use the Elevate platform to learn that. But I think a lot of it's really like, figuring out for yourself what you like and what you don't like. So that introspection, I think, is another thing I'd sort of highlight to that. Why don't we go to Maria? She joins us from Europe. So Maria, if you want to ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time. So I'm joining from Paris. I'm originally from Spain, and I finished the first year master's at the School of Political Studies in Paris. And I think you've given some great advice already, but what would be the one thing that you didn't know when you were at university that you wish you had known in terms of advice? And the second part of the question is building on Billy's question earlier. So what have you learned from this pandemic and how has that changed the way you work? I guess communication has become even more important, but perhaps other things. Thank you.
It's a good question. I mean, the reality is, you know, I've been fortunate to I've been fortunate to have received a lot of advice. I would say, and I'm sure somewhere along the line I got it, but one thing that truly, you know, resonates with me now is patience. You know, when you're an undergrad, you go through school, you know, you have semesters, you have the summer, like everything, nothing is forever. But when you're sitting in the seat now, generally, you know, it's for the long term, right? And so things don't necessarily happen in days and weeks, and you know, you're not taking the next test and the next test. I mean, so that is one thing that I wish that I thought about more, just being patient. I think, you know, I think and then to answer your question in terms of, you know, what has happened with the pandemic, et cetera. Look, I mean, I think a lot of it is, as you alluded to, right? It comes down to communication. It comes down to over communication. You know, I mean, you know, if you're in your apartment or you're in your, wherever you are, your dorm, like whatever tasks you're, you know, whatever you're being delegated, you still got to get the work done. You still want to make sure that, you know, that you're delivering Class A work. I would say, you know, one of the things that is also really important to be mindful of as well is everyone has different circumstances. Everyone's going through different things. And I think it's really important to be cognizant of that in terms of managing different folks. I mean, whether it's, I'm working with my analyst or a VP or an MD, right? Like we're now living in a world where everything is just both professionally and personally, all is in one right now. And it's just really important to keep that in mind because we're all dealing with different things. You know, you could be upset for some, you know, like, so I think it's a long-winded way of saying, just have a little, you know, have some perspective and understand that we're all working with, you know, we're all working with multiple things, both on a personal, professional level. And, you know, it's just something that I think is really important to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, great answer, Vince. I would also say one thing, just be cognizant of like reputation and sort of leaving something better than you left it. I think over the course of a career, these worlds are really small, right? I think obviously everyone sort of gets to know each other. So just leaving things in a better place and also making sure you make a positive impact, whatever that is you're doing, it could be kind of work or whatever, I think is really important in terms of people like people they like working, or people work with people they like work, you know, they like. So I think that's another thing I would just focus on, your interpersonal skills as well. A couple more questions. I think we had, Vince, can you stay on just a couple more minutes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay, cool. So can we go to Feras from Rutgers? I know this is sort of top of mind with a lot of the virtual interviews and stuff that are going on, but Feras, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, hey guys, how are you doing? Again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. My name's Feras, and I am a sophomore majoring in finance at Rutgers Business School. And I was wondering if you have any tips on making a good impression during Hirevues and/or virtual interviews, as this is what the industry is doing.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think it falls along the lines of a lot of things that we've been talking about, but one of the things that is really important is, you know, which is underestimated, have a smile, have a lot of energy. You know, I mean, all the other stuff that you know, all the other like articulating your story, all of that's really important, but you would be surprised, like have a smile, have a lot of energy, show that you're really, you know, that you're really excited about whatever you're articulating, whatever you're talking about, whatever story it is, show that you're there and you're, you know, you're there because you want to be there. And so, you know, in the absence of having a in-person interview, you just got to be creative and think about like, what's the best way for me to showcase that I'm really excited about this job. So I'll pause there, but.
Yeah, great answer. It's sort of, what is in your control, right? You can't control the pandemic. You can't control, like, you know, the fact that you're not there in New York to do your super day, but what you can control is kind of your attitude, what you bring to the table, how you approach these questions and problems that you have, preparation, you know, all that stuff. But I think back to Vince's point, the first 5 minutes, you know, or first couple minutes of any conversation, even Zoom informationals, right? Like bringing that energy and sort of kind of being there, I think really helps for everyone. So great answer. And then let's go to John Gold from one of our MBA schools at Duke, or one of our Elevate MBA partners. So John, go ahead, ask your questions. Good question.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kaushik, and thank you, Vince. John Gold, first-year student at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. So Vince, one thing I'd love to hear from you, if you don't mind sharing at least, is maybe a couple of mistakes that you made early in your career that were just kind of really big learning moments. And it could be something on the technical side, but I'm even more thinking, relationally, managing up, managing down, not understanding expectations, things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be clear, I still continue to make mistakes. So just let's be clear on that. But so number one, look, I mean, like I said before, I was not a desirable analyst to work with my first year. I didn't, honestly, I was trying to figure out how to tie my own shoes. I couldn't open a PowerPoint, Excel. Like it was, it was unique. And so like understand that. With all that being said, I mean, look, like one thing that I can remember pretty distinctly was I was asked to spread, I think it was a sheet of like 5 comps and to have like a bunch of data on each. And the associate at the time was like, okay, 2 are done, 3, we have 3 that need to go. Okay, fine. So I do the 3, I give it to him. And he's just like, well, what about the first 2? Why is this number wrong? And I was like, well, you said that those were done. He was like, when you deliver a page, or whatever it is, you take ownership of it. And so I very quickly realized that even if things come off the shelf, they could be wrong. And so you got to remember that, or what I learned is like, you got to remember that you're going to wear that page and you're going to wear that deck. And that's happened multiple times where I've had, an MD be like, oh yeah, just take this page off the shelf, like a precedent transaction page. And, he comes back and he's like, this thing was banged up. And I was like, well, you told me. And he's just like, and he was just like, it doesn't matter, right? Like you gotta own the page. So that's, those are like some of the, those are kind of the learning lessons. And look, I mean, I would say the other thing on the qualitative side, right? I mean, other than sure, make sure your numbers are right, make sure that numbers tie across the entire page, across the full deck. If you have a deck of 10 pages and you're showing a multiple on one page and the same multiple on the 10th page, like the numbers need to be the same. So that's like more of the technical aspect. I'd say the qualitative, which is trickier. Look, I mean, as an analyst, you're focused on, you're kind of managing yourself, right? You're just making sure that you're getting the work done. When you become an associate, you're managing an analyst, you're managing yourself, and you're also on the hook for, you're on the hook to make sure that all the numbers are right, everything makes sense, et cetera. And of course, like progressively, as you become more senior, everyone has to focus and make sure that everything is correct. But when you're managing someone junior, I think, and this is candidly something that I have to continue to work on, right? Like there are different ways to work with different folks. And so when you're an analyst, you're a doer. When you're an associate, you do and you check, right? And so I think, look, I mean, as I've kind of progressed over my time, I mean, that's something that, that is important. You got to remember, like when you're managing someone else's time, it's important to be cognizant of, the work that you're creating and, it's important to be reasonable is a short answer. So that's more on the qualitative aspect of it. It's just managing other people, especially juniors, because they are a resource, but at the same time, like, it's one team, one dream here. So.
Great answer. One thing I'll add to that is try to go to every meeting that you possibly can, especially if it's a client meeting or an internal meeting, because the amount of learning you could do with other people is like compounds the amount of learning that you do by yourself, right? So that's why I encourage all of my analysts or associates or principals to do all the time, like go to every meeting that you possibly can. And if you're not invited, invite yourself. Be like, hey, would it be okay if I dialed in and was on mute, right? And took notes. And maybe that's a great way you can add value. I'll take notes and send it around or whatever. I think just kind of the amount of learning you could do with other people who are really, it's like, imagine 5 partners on a call and you can listen to 5 times 30 years of experience. That's invaluable, right? So that's one thing I'd add on to sort of Vince's first point. Okay, so we're a little bit past time. Vince, anything you want to say closing about the Elevate platform or kind of any advice that you have for people?
Yeah, look, so one, obviously, I think the platform here is fantastic. I wish, when I was going through undergrad, there was such a thing. Because, you got to remember that not only is, Kaushik and the team putting out really good content, I'd say the other piece too is despite the fact that you guys are all going to different schools, like it's one network, right? And as you guys progress in your career, you should be able to, hey, I worked with this person through the Elevate program, or like you guys will see over time the vitality of this platform, right? So that's with respect to Elevate. Look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, one piece of, one concluding remark is, there's a poem that my favorite poem is The Man in the Glass. And, I think it's important, like the short answer is when you kind of think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, it's really important to remember, and this is what this poem lays out, it's really important to remember that, you can appease your mom, you can appease your dad, your friends, your family, all this other stuff. It's really important. But at the end of the day, you got to look at yourself in the mirror, and you got to be really happy with what you're doing and why you're doing it. You don't need to fool me. You don't need to fool whoever, right? At the end of the day, you just got to focus on yourself. And I think, and perhaps it's, as you guys endeavor upon your journeys, it's just important to remember that. Don't do things because other people are doing it or because they're telling you to do it or what have you, right? Go into investment banking because you actually want to do it. Go into private equity because you want to be an investor. Go to a hedge fund because you want to trade public equities, or don't go into finance at all, whatever it is. I think it's really important because it's really easy to get bogged down with, doing what you think other folks are doing or focused on, et cetera. And frankly, it's something that I have wrestled with since I graduated high school. It's just a reality. So I would say that's my, I'll hop off my soapbox, but that's my piece of advice.
Amazing advice. I think we're all fortunate to be in the positions we're in now. So we're kind of looking ahead, and every experience is a journey, right? Your career is 40 years long, right? For anything you learn about yourself. Maybe it's a wrong call, you do whatever, and you kind of move on. At the end of the day, to Vince's point, I think you got to be happy with the impact you're making, and as well as sort of the problems you're solving, and sort of the skill set that you're building. But it'll take time. I think, all of our MBAs who are on this call can attest, they're in their kind of late 20s. They're still, sort of figuring out what the next step is. So I think, just as a journey, wish you best of luck. Recommend you check us, continue to be involved in the Elevate stuff. But I want to really thank Vince for his time today to kind of share with all you guys his lessons learned. We're super excited to have on, amazing, modest speakers like Vince, and have him share sort of his career lessons. So great, guys. I'll send you some resources. Just get on our either our Instagram or our newsletter, and then you'll get access to all this stuff. And then check out the trainings and other platform like programming like this that are on YouTube, and you can go watch it later and hear what other people have to say. So that's it. Thank you, Vince.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, guys, you got it. Cheers.